In the dim silence of an imperial archive, where dust gathers like forgotten memories and the faint scent of parchment lingers in the air, lies a relic shrouded in whispers, the Piri Reis Map. Locked away for centuries within the Topkapi Palace of Istanbul, this map is not just a drawing of coastlines, it is a riddle etched in ink, a challenge hurled across the ages. Scholars who first laid eyes on it were startled, for it depicted lands that should not have been discovered at the time of its creation. South America, portions of Africa, and even what some argue is the coastline of Antarctica, centuries before modern explorers would set foot there. How could a 16th-century Ottoman admiral chart territories that the world had yet to know? Picture the scene, the map, frayed yet resilient, spread open under flickering torchlight. The ink strokes are careful, deliberate, as though the cartographer knew he was painting a secret forbidden to his age. Each coastline curves with uncanny precision, mocking the limits of Renaissance exploration. To the untrained eye, it seems miraculous. To the historian, it is deeply unsettling. Where did Piri Reis gather this knowledge? Did he draw from ancient sources now lost to us? Or did he uncover fragments of a forgotten world, a civilization erased from history yet still whispering through lines of ink? The more one gazes, the more the questions multiply. It is as if the map itself resists explanation, daring us to believe in legends of Atlantean knowledge, secret voyages, or even contacts with civilizations we are taught never existed. Standing before it, one cannot escape the haunting thought, what if our history is not the full story? What if the world we think we know has always been larger, stranger, and far more mysterious than we dare admit? The story of Piri Reis cannot be understood without first stepping into the turbulent, glittering, and blood-soaked world in which he lived. The early 16th century was an age defined by maps, ships, and the unrelenting hunger of empires. Spain and Portugal dominated the seas, propelled by the spirit of exploration, and the thirst for conquest. The Treaty of Tordesillas had carved the globe into two halves, an agreement that assumed Europe's right to divide the world as though it were a chessboard. Across the Atlantic, conquistadors returned with gold, silver, and tales of strange civilizations. Across the Indian Ocean, Portuguese fleets fired cannons at coastal kingdoms, forcing trade routes into submission. It was a time when maps were not just practical tools but instruments of power, locked away in royal archives and jealously guarded by monarchs who understood their worth. Against this backdrop emerged Piri Reis, an admiral of the Ottoman navy, a scholar, and a cartographer whose ambition extended beyond the known horizon. Born in Gallipoli, a naval hub of the empire, he grew up amidst sailors' tales of distant lands and merchants whispering about new trade routes. To the Ottomans, the sea was both a battlefield and a marketplace, and young Piri quickly learned that mastery of the oceans meant mastery of wealth and influence. But Piri's genius lay not only in command of ships but in his ability to gather fragments of knowledge and weave them into a larger vision. He scoured the records of ancient scholars, listened to the stories of captured sailors, and consulted maps obtained through war and trade. Where others saw scraps of parchment, he saw patterns. Where others saw contradiction, he saw possibility. His work would culminate in a map that stunned future generations. Yet in his time, Piri was just one figure navigating an empire that itself stood at a crossroads. The Ottoman state had risen as a colossus, straddling 3 continents. Its armies had reached the gates of Vienna, while its merchants controlled the lifeblood of Silk Road trade. But in the age of the sea, the Ottomans were challengers rather than masters. The Portuguese and Spanish fleets expanded into the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, while the Ottomans sought to counter them with naval power of their own. This struggle was not merely about ships but about knowledge. Whoever controlled the secrets of navigation controlled the world. Maps became more dangerous than swords, for in them lay the ability to predict, to plan, to conquer. And unlike the printed books of Europe, many maps were unique, hand-copied, sometimes hidden, sometimes destroyed. They were whispered about like forbidden relics, rumored to contain truths too dangerous for the public. It is here that Piri Reis stands apart. His 1513 map was not the creation of a single man but a synthesis of centuries. He claimed to have drawn upon 20 sources, including maps from Arab navigators, charts captured from Portuguese explorers, and, most tantalizing of all, one said to descend from the voyages of Christopher Columbus himself. Yet even these cannot explain the details his map revealed: coastlines of South America drawn with uncanny accuracy, and the puzzling depiction of Antarctica centuries before its official discovery. What makes this tale all the more captivating is the contrast of worlds. On one hand, the pragmatic, calculating admiral, a man of empire, duty, and war. On the other, the enduring whispers that his work concealed something older, something impossible, knowledge from civilizations long vanished, passed down through secret channels. Was Piri simply the most skilled compiler of his age, or had he tapped into a forgotten library of humanity? In the twilight between fact and speculation, Piri Reis's map becomes not just a tool of geography but a portal into mystery. And as we trace the shadows of the age of empires, the question lingers: did this Ottoman admiral simply map the world, or did he uncover traces of one that came before? In 1929, within the walls of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a discovery was made that would shake the foundations of historical cartography. The palace itself, once the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire, had long been a repository of ancient manuscripts, scrolls, and forgotten treasures. That year, as a group of scholars sifted through stacks of neglected documents, their eyes fell upon a fragment of parchment, its edges frayed and stained with centuries of time. It appeared unremarkable at first, just another aged relic of a bygone era. Yet as the dust was brushed away and the ink revealed itself, the scholars found themselves staring at something that seemed almost impossible. Drawn in careful strokes of fading pigment, the map displayed coastlines that did not belong to the 16th century. Among its depictions lay the unmistakable outline of South America, drawn with shocking accuracy. But most astonishing of all was what appeared at the bottom of the parchment, a coastline resembling Antarctica, free of ice. This was centuries before modern expeditions had even confirmed the existence of the frozen continent, let alone mapped its shorelines. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the scratching of pens as the researchers began making notes. The fragment came to be known as the Piri Reis Map, named after the Ottoman admiral and cartographer who had compiled it in 1513. Piri Reis himself had claimed to use older sources, ancient charts said to have been passed down from civilizations long forgotten. But here, in the palace archives, scholars were confronted with a puzzle. How could a 16th-century admiral have possessed knowledge that defied the limitations of his time? Authentication efforts began almost immediately. The material was genuine, deer-skin parchment, its ink dating back to the early 1500s. Experts confirmed the handwriting style of Piri Reis, his unique marginal notes still visible along the map's edges. In one note, he even boasted of using maps drawn in the days of Alexander the Great. That claim alone sent shockwaves through the academic world. Was Piri Reis exaggerating, or had he truly gained access to knowledge stretching back thousands of years? Yet the authenticity only deepened the mystery. The coastlines were not drawn crudely or with guesswork, they were precise, detailed, and eerily modern. Antarctica's outline was particularly haunting. In 1929, it was buried under a thick ice sheet, invisible to the human eye. Yet here it was, inked centuries earlier as though someone had mapped it from above, with the clarity of a satellite image. As word spread beyond the palace walls, the discovery captured imaginations worldwide. Scientists argued, historians debated, and conspiracy theorists whispered of ancient seafarers who had circumnavigated the globe long before Columbus. The Piri Reis map was no longer a dusty fragment of parchment, it had become a key, unlocking unsettling questions about the true history of exploration. And with every attempt to explain it, the enigma only grew darker, pulling the world deeper into a story that seemed to defy time itself. The icy continent of Antarctica seems like the last place to look for clues about forbidden knowledge, and yet it has become one of the most perplexing puzzles in the study of ancient mysteries. Hidden beneath miles of ice, this desolate land was officially discovered in the early 19th century, and yet maps exist, dating back centuries earlier, that appear to show its coastlines with uncanny accuracy. The most infamous of these is the Piri Reis Map of 1513, drawn by an Ottoman admiral who claimed his sources came from much older documents. What unsettles historians is that this map seems to depict not only the known coastlines of South America and Africa but also an outline of what resembles the northern edge of Antarctica, drawn long before anyone is believed to have set eyes on the frozen continent. Skeptics quickly argue that the resemblance is a coincidence. To them, the coastlines could be misinterpretations of South America distorted by the cartographer's limited tools. After all, early maps are riddled with mistakes, misplaced islands, and speculative features. Yet, the counterargument, the one that fuels late-night discussions and sparks whispers of hidden knowledge, is that the map doesn't just vaguely resemble Antarctica, it seems to depict it without its ice cover, showing mountain ranges and coastal details that match modern seismic surveys taken beneath the ice. How could a map from the 1500s, compiled from even older sources, have such insight? This tension between conventional scholarship and alternative speculation is where the story grips us. On one side, cartographers and historians insist there's no great mystery here, just human error magnified by our tendency to search for patterns. On the other side, theorists suggest the possibility that ancient civilizations, or perhaps forgotten explorers, had far greater knowledge of the world than mainstream history admits. If the latter is true, it would mean that some culture in the distant past navigated the globe, charted territories, and passed that information down through hidden manuscripts until fragments reached the hands of mapmakers like Piri Reis. The deeper one goes, the stranger the story becomes. Other early maps, such as the Orontius Phineas map of 1531, also appear to show Antarctica's outline, complete with rivers and inlets not visible beneath its current frozen shell. These repeating anomalies create a chilling question: if Antarctica was mapped in such detail, was it once ice-free, inhabited, and known to ancient mariners who walked a very different world than we imagine? Geological studies suggest that Antarctica may indeed have had temperate climates in the distant past, long before human civilization as we know it. Could a prehistoric society have thrived there, only to be buried by ice ages and forgotten by time? Scientists dismiss this notion, pointing out that Antarctica has been covered in ice for millions of years. Yet even within scientific circles, there are disagreements about the pace of glacial shifts. Some argue that smaller regions might have been exposed during warmer interglacial periods, allowing brief glimpses of land and coastlines. Others highlight how fragile and fragmentary the evidence is. But those who chase the forbidden history narrative see in these disputes an opening. If even science admits some uncertainty, then the door remains cracked open for something far stranger than we are allowed to imagine. The cinematic tension lies here, the rational explanation seeks to ground us, but the allure of a hidden history pulls us deeper. The mainstream insists these maps are nothing more than flawed attempts at charting the known world, stitched together from sailor accounts, myth, and guesswork. But alternative voices whisper of ancient libraries, perhaps in Alexandria or Constantinople, where records from lost civilizations were stored before vanishing into fire or conquest. If such documents ever existed, they could have preserved the knowledge of explorers whose achievements were erased long before our own history began. This is why Antarctica has become more than a frozen desert, it is a canvas onto which we project our deepest uncertainties about the past. The continent is largely unexplored, shielded by its impenetrable ice and guarded by strict international treaties that forbid private excavation or settlement. For mystery seekers, this secrecy itself is evidence. Why protect such a barren place so fiercely unless something lies hidden beneath? Some theories stretch into the realm of the fantastic, suggesting buried ruins, alien relics, or advanced technology locked in frozen tombs. Even if these ideas seem implausible, they capture imaginations because they offer what orthodox history does not, a sense of wonder, danger, and the possibility that we are not being told the full story. As the ice sheets slowly melt under modern climate change, satellite imagery continues to reveal strange shapes and patterns beneath the white expanse, mountain peaks, geometric formations, and anomalies that ignite speculation. Scientists say these are natural formations, carved by geology and glaciers. Yet for those already convinced of a cover-up, every new image feels like a glimpse into a hidden truth too unsettling for the world to acknowledge. And so, the myth grows, feeding a feedback loop between scientific data, human imagination, and the timeless desire to uncover secrets buried in silence. The mystery of the Antarctica maps, then, is less about proving one side right and the other wrong, and more about what the debate itself reveals. It shows us our hunger to believe that the past held something greater, something magnificent, that our textbooks failed to capture. It forces us to question, if even one map detail is accurate, how much else has been forgotten? Was Antarctica once a cradle of life, or is it merely a blank screen onto which we project our longing for lost civilizations? And as we turn the page to the next chapter, the suspense lingers. For if ancient maps truly preserve knowledge we should not possess, then what else might lie hidden in the archives of history, knowledge erased, concealed, or deliberately withheld from us, waiting for those who dare to seek it? For centuries, scholars and adventurers alike have puzzled over a single line hidden within the description of the map, that it was not born from one man's genius, but rather compiled from 20 ancient charts. That single phrase ignites more questions than it answers. What were these charts? Who created them? And, perhaps most importantly, what knowledge did they hold that has now slipped through the cracks of time? The claim itself suggests that the cartographer was not simply recording coastlines from his own voyages, but instead acting as a collector, an archivist of secrets, pulling together fragments of a much older tradition of navigation. If this is true, then the map is not just a marvel of its own era, it is a ghostly echo of civilizations long gone, whispering to us across the centuries. Some historians believe these 20 charts may have been fragments that survived the burning of the Library of Alexandria, that fabled vault of human knowledge said to contain records of the ancient world's greatest discoveries. Others speculate that they were Phoenician in origin. The Phoenicians, master sailors of the Mediterranean, are believed by some to have circled Africa, perhaps even to have ventured across the Atlantic. If so, then the traces of their work might have drifted from hand to hand, copy to copy, until they reached the desk of the man who assembled the map in question. But there are whispers of even older sources, civilizations that mainstream history refuses to acknowledge. Could it be that fragments from Atlantis, or the lost continent of Mu, somehow survived the deluge of time, encoded in these charts? Modern scientists often push back on these claims, arguing that such legends are myth, not evidence. They remind us that the ancient Greeks loved to invent stories of golden ages and sunken kingdoms. Yet the counterpoint is equally tantalizing, myths so often mask kernels of truth. What if the flood legends told by Sumerians, the Mayans, and even echoed in the book of Genesis, were not metaphor at all, but memories of real cataclysms? In that case, is it impossible that survivors of such civilizations might have preserved their geographical knowledge, carrying it into the hands of seafarers thousands of years later? The deeper one looks, the stranger it becomes. Some of the coastlines represented on the map appear with uncanny accuracy, even those that were thought to be undiscovered at the time. To skeptics, this suggests coincidence or perhaps clever guesswork. To others, it's evidence of a lost system of cartography, one far more advanced than anything Europe possessed in the 16th century. If the map's compiler truly worked from 20 older sources, then we must ask, where did those originals come from, and how far back into the human story do they stretch? Imagine the journey of those charts. Written perhaps on papyrus in ancient Egypt, copied onto parchment by medieval monks, carried aboard merchant vessels from port to port, and eventually pieced together into a single mosaic centuries later. Each step of that journey leaves gaps, distortions, and mysteries. Yet something survived. Enough to hint that the ancients knew more than we give them credit for. Enough to suggest that our history, as carefully as it has been written, may still be missing entire chapters. As we peer into this puzzle, we must stand at the uneasy crossroads of fact and myth. On one side, historians insisting that all can be explained by chance, skill, or exaggeration. On the other, the lingering suspicion that what we are seeing is evidence of contact with knowledge long buried, knowledge from cultures whose names we no longer even remember. And that tension, that haunting uncertainty, is what keeps the map alive in our imaginations. The phrase, 20 ancient charts, is not just a detail, it is a door, one that opens onto the possibility of forgotten worlds, and invites us to step through. They say maps are never neutral. Every line, curve, and symbol tells a story, not only of geography, but of power, secrecy, and intent. At first glance, the map we've been examining appears like any other artifact of its age, oceans filled with sea monsters, coastlines traced with shaky precision, and ornate compass roses decorating the corners. But when we begin to look closer, when we read between the ink and the parchment, a far stranger story begins to unfold. One of the most striking details lies not in what the map shows, but in what it hides. Strange annotations, scrawled in a script half familiar yet half unreadable, wind around the margins like whispers meant only for those in the know. Some symbols resemble navigational notes, while others look more like ciphers, letters shifted, reversed, or encoded in patterns that scholars have struggled to decode. Why would a simple cartographer, tasked with sketching coastlines, need to cloak his notes in secrecy? Theories range from the practical to the conspiratorial. Some historians suggest these markings were simply shorthand, a way for the mapmaker to keep track of measurements or corrections. But others propose something far more intriguing, that these were deliberate encryptions, meant to obscure knowledge considered too dangerous, or too valuable, for public eyes. After all, during the age of exploration, maps were not just tools, they were weapons of empire. To know a coast before your rival was to hold the keys to wealth, power, and dominance. Yet it is not only the coded text that raises questions. Across the oceans of this map, strange creatures swim. Sea serpents, horned fish, and winged leviathans adorn waters once thought impassable. Are these merely fanciful illustrations, meant to entertain the wealthy patrons who funded these charts? Or are they warnings, encoded in imagery, of dangers that sailors truly believed lurked beyond the horizon? One cannot help but notice how carefully these monsters are placed, not scattered randomly, but aligned with specific regions known for treacherous currents, hidden reefs, or lands jealously guarded by locals. It is as if the cartographer wove mythology into geography, blurring the line between fact and fear. But then there are the most unsettling details of all, outlines of continents, fragments of landmasses that seem too accurate for their time. Tiny shapes that resemble the southern tip of South America, or coastlines that suspiciously echo parts of Antarctica, centuries before they were officially discovered. Could these be strokes of coincidence? Or is this evidence that knowledge of these places existed long before the history books are willing to admit? Here lies the psychological tension, the possibility that entire chapters of exploration were erased, rewritten, or hidden, leaving only ghostly traces encoded in ink. One note, often overlooked by casual observers, is particularly haunting, a cryptic phrase scribbled near what appears to be the edge of the known world. The words, translated roughly, mean, "Here begins the land they forbade us to speak of." For whom was this warning written? Fellow cartographers? Secret patrons? Or perhaps future generations, to remind them that silence was enforced upon knowledge itself? In decoding these secrets, we face the most unnerving possibility of all, that the map is not merely a geographical record, but a confession. A silent testimony that others had seen, had known, and had chosen to hide their discoveries beneath layers of ink, cipher, and myth. Each symbol becomes not just a mark on paper, but an echo of forbidden knowledge, waiting for those daring enough to question what we have been told. And so, what began as a simple artifact now feels like a doorway. A door into a world where history, power, and secrecy collide, leaving us with a haunting question: how much of what we know about the past is truth, and how much is encoded, hidden, or lost? For centuries, the pursuit of truth has been a battleground. On one side stand the scientists, armed with microscopes, equations, and peer-reviewed journals, insisting that every anomaly, every strange artifact, must bow to the authority of natural law. On the other side gather the seekers of forbidden knowledge, independent researchers, mystics, and fringe historians, who claim that the very foundations of reality are built on secrets too dangerous, too destabilizing, for the mainstream to ever admit. This clash of worlds is not merely academic. It is psychological, cultural, and deeply personal. When archaeologists discover an ancient carving that seems to depict an astronaut, mainstream voices argue it is symbolic art, misinterpreted by overzealous imaginations. Yet fringe scholars insist it is proof that humanity once walked beside beings not of this earth. The debate grows heated, not because of the carving itself, but because of what it represents, two irreconcilable ways of seeing the world. Science demands evidence, testable and replicable. It is cautious, even skeptical, by design. Mysteries must be reduced to data points, filed into neat categories, explained until nothing of wonder remains. Forbidden knowledge thrives in the opposite direction. It revels in the unexplained, in the shadows, in the whisper that perhaps the world is far stranger than we dare believe. For every skeptic pointing out flaws, there is a seeker pointing to the gaps, those eerie silences history books cannot fill. The tension becomes most cinematic when anomalies refuse to vanish. Take the case of ancient maps allegedly showing Antarctica without ice, drawn centuries before modern exploration. Geologists dismiss them as distorted errors, products of sailors' guesswork. Yet fringe historians argue that they hint at a civilization advanced enough to chart lands long before our textbooks say it was possible. Both camps present arguments with passion, and the viewer is left caught in the middle, wondering who is truly blind, the skeptic who refuses to see, or the believer who sees too much. This clash of worlds also shapes how societies remember the past. Scientific orthodoxy often rewrites history in the language of progress, humanity evolving steadily, step by step, from ignorance into enlightenment. Forbidden knowledge disrupts this comforting narrative, whispering that perhaps there were interruptions, lost civilizations, vanished technologies, cataclysms that erased entire epochs of human achievement. If that were true, then everything we think we know about our place in the cosmos would collapse. And so the stakes rise beyond dusty libraries and lecture halls. Careers are built, or destroyed, on which side one chooses. A scientist risks ridicule by entertaining ideas of ancient astronauts, a seeker risks dismissal as a charlatan for proposing that myths may hold literal truths. Yet both, in their own way, are chasing the same thing, answers to the oldest questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? What forces shaped the human story before recorded history began? As the clash deepens, the audience cannot help but sense that the truth may lie somewhere between these extremes, or perhaps, disturbingly, outside of them both. Science insists on boundaries, forbidden knowledge erases them. Together, they form a tension that keeps the mystery alive, unresolved, and irresistibly compelling. Because in the end, the greatest mysteries are not the ones we solve, but the ones that refuse to be solved. For centuries, the name Atlantis has stirred the human imagination. Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, described it as a mighty island empire that existed 9,000 years before his time. It was a land of great wealth and advanced knowledge, flourishing until it was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Many dismissed his account as allegory, a philosopher's parable meant to caution against hubris and imperial pride. Yet, others could not help but wonder, what if Atlantis was more than myth? What if fragments of its knowledge survived, carried secretly across generations, until they resurfaced in unexpected ways? The mysterious Ottoman map seems to whisper that very possibility. The detail etched into its coastline, the depiction of lands thought unknown, the strange hints of accuracy that defy contemporary cartography, all invite speculation that its creators possessed knowledge passed down from an age before recorded history. Could this be the faint echo of an advanced civilization, drowned yet not forgotten? Plato's dialogues tell us Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was described as a naval power, capable of dominating territories as far as Egypt and Italy. The parallels are striking when compared to seafaring peoples of antiquity, the Phoenicians, the Minoans, but the sheer scale of Plato's tale far surpasses them. Skeptics remind us that no archaeological evidence has ever confirmed Atlantis. Still, the persistence of the legend across cultures is unsettling. Flood myths appear in nearly every corner of the globe, from the Mesopotamian story of Utnapishtim, to the biblical flood of Noah, to the submerged lands of Kumari Kandam in Tamil lore. Different continents, different tongues, yet all speaking of great civilizations lost to waters that rose without mercy. Is it coincidence, or collective memory of a cataclysm our ancestors barely survived? The Ottoman cartographer, Piri Reis, claimed to have based his work on ancient charts, some supposedly originating in the time of Alexander the Great. But what if those charts were older still, relics copied and recopied from sources reaching back into prehistory? If Atlantis had indeed existed, its survivors may have preserved fragments of knowledge, fragments that outlived the destruction of their homeland. Imagine mariners carrying weathered scrolls across the Mediterranean, maps etched onto parchment long before most of the world had even begun to dream of cartography. By the time those documents reached Renaissance scholars and Ottoman admirals, they may have been nothing more than shadows of their original form, yet even shadows can reveal truths. Some researchers point to the uncanny accuracy of certain features on the map. It seemed to show parts of South America, long before official exploration reached those coasts. Even more curious, sections appear to depict Antarctica, not as it lies now, frozen and forbidding, but as if it were free of ice. Geologists tell us Antarctica has been entombed under ice for millions of years. And yet, seismic surveys of its bedrock hint at a time when its coastline may have been different, when ancient rivers flowed across a temperate land. The idea seems impossible, yet it is exactly such impossibilities that feed the Atlantis question. If knowledge of those lands truly survived, from what epoch did it originate? There is a haunting possibility here, that Atlantis, or whatever civilization inspired the myth, did not simply vanish but was deliberately erased. Human history is a palimpsest, written and rewritten across time. Victors preserve what they choose, and suppress what threatens their narrative. Could it be that the legend of Atlantis survived because it could not be fully extinguished, a story told in whispers, waiting to resurface in fragments like the Ottoman map? If so, the cartographer may not have realized he was holding the faint pulse of a civilization that defied time itself. The most chilling thought, however, is not that Atlantis existed, but that it may have perished in a way that could happen again. Plato spoke of divine punishment, but many modern theorists link the story to natural disaster, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, or even the shifting of Earth's crust. The sudden drowning of an empire is not impossible, it is inevitable in a world as volatile as ours. Just as the sea swallowed Atlantis, the same fate could one day befall us. The whispers preserved in old maps and myths are not just curiosities, but warnings. And so, when we trace our fingers across the faded lines of the Ottoman chart, we are not simply looking at coastlines and oceans. We are looking at echoes. Echoes of a people who may have stood where we stand, gazed upon stars we still struggle to understand, and watched helplessly as their world was taken from them. Atlantis may remain a mystery, a legend forever debated, but perhaps the truest clue lies in the fact that its story never dies. It endures because it may not be fiction at all, it may be memory, scattered across maps, myths, and the restless imagination of humankind. For centuries, maps were far more than navigation tools, they were instruments of control. To the common sailor or merchant, a map meant survival. But to kings, sultans, and emperors, maps represented dominion, secrecy, and power. What was revealed on paper was often less important than what was deliberately hidden. Consider the vast repositories of knowledge that remain locked away from public eyes. The Vatican, for example, houses one of the largest secret archives in the world. It is said to contain over 50 miles of shelves, stacked with manuscripts, reports, and possibly even maps of regions that were charted long before they were discovered. Only a select few scholars are granted access, and even then, only to specific documents. What might lie within those restricted chambers? Could there be cartographic evidence of civilizations erased from memory, coastlines altered before rising seas, or trade routes leading